Hello, Honors 110. So for today's class, we had technically 4 separate readings. I treat it more like it's 3 readings just because I sort of consider that like an introductory part of what does it mean to be an educated person, more of just kind of an introduction and an overview of things. But rest assured, please feel free to kind of weigh in on that one in the discussion below, even though I won't be discussing that one as explicitly. But to dive right in here, before we go into the readings themselves, I wanted to pose a little bit of kind of just a mental exercise that I'll leave a thread open for in the discussion below, which is to rank different educational outcomes in terms of their importance. And you know, also think of them as educational priorities. The things I'm going to list here are job readiness, critical thinking / wisdom, which I know aren't quite the same, but I think you might see why I would lump those things together as kind of soft skills that are kind of a little bit harder to quantify and whatnot. Being a good community member, and memorization of facts and procedures. With this, I know it's an imperfect exercise because a lot of these things are intertwined with each other, and it's hard to kind of identify why one's important without another, and so on and so forth. So know that this is not meant to be sort of like a be-all, end-all, you're committed to this ranking for the rest of your life, but more as just kind of a way of just thinking about all of these reasons why we have an education system, why we take classes, and I think different ways, different ones of these kind of apply to some of the context of the readings themselves. So again, I'll leave that list kind of below so you can process it a little bit more, actually read it, and then participate in that part of the discussion thread. But otherwise, getting into the readings themselves. So we start with the Shinzu because of just kind of phonetic pronunciation. I know sometimes students jump to thinking this is Sun Tzu, the person who wrote The Art of War. That is a totally different individual. So Shinzu, as it's pronounced. I'm going to just touch on a small handful of points here. So towards the opening of the reading, he has this whole passage about wood being shaped by metal, and how once something is shaped a certain way, it's hard to unshape it, and so on and so forth. And I was just posing the question of how we read that metaphor, what we think that ultimately means, what point is he driving at? And this is mostly on page 6 from the textbook. Carrying on from there, on page 7, we have this quote: "Every phenomenon that appears must have a cause. The glory or shame that come to a man are no more than the image of his virtue." And then it carries on here, "Trees of the same species grow together. Birds and beasts gather in herds, for all things follow after their own kind." And then finally, this is towards the end of the page. "So there are words that invite disaster and actions that call down shame. A gentleman must be careful where he takes his stand." And so I just want to pose a question of, you was isolating those specific quotes from page 7, what we think Shinzu is ultimately driving at here about the choices we make, to kind of start to guide the discussion a little bit, about like the people we associate with, and how that kind of affects who we become, and particularly in kind of an educational framework. And then I have just 2 other spots I'm going to take us to in the text here. On page 8, towards the end of that first big paragraph, it reads, "He who tries to travel 2 roads at once will arrive nowhere. He who serves 2 masters will please neither." And this is a little bit more straightforward as kind of a piece of wisdom. But with this, I imagine some people have probably heard something like this before. But nonetheless, I think it bears kind of teasing out. Do we agree with this idea? What does this idea actually mean? A good deal of what Shinzu writes is a little bit more metaphorical and symbolic than literal. So yeah, what do we kind of interpret that to mean? And do we agree with that idea? And then finally, just looking towards the very end of this piece, Shinzu references the complete person, or the value of completeness. And he uses all this language around the gentleman. Obviously, that's kind of unnecessarily gendered. This could be any person, I think, in a valid read of this thing. But what he sort of means by complete, and how we interpret that. Okay, so that's all I have on Shinzu. But again, the discussion thread below, feel free to respond to my questions, but also feel free to bring in your own ideas and things you were interested in. But for Seneca, kind of turn to the page here. First thing I wanted to address is this essay by Seneca is framed as a letter, written in the second person. I expect many of you have gotten the advice in the past, don't write in the second person, especially when you're writing formal assignments. But Seneca pulls it off here. And then the question is, why would he make that choice? Why is that effective in this context? If you think that was effective, just sort of what sense we make of that letter writing framework here. Beyond that, on pages 15 to 16, we get at this whole idea, especially as we get into early page 16. I'm going to read a quote here. Why then do we give our sons a liberal education? Not because it can make them morally good, but because it prepares the mind for the acquisition of moral values, and dropping down towards the end of the page, it's kind of midway through that bottom paragraph on page 16, it reads, there's no reason for you to assume that X, being something without which Y could never have come about, Y came about as a result of the assistance of X. And so it's a little bit complicated kind of in the way that it's framed here. And I think an overly simplistic reading of Seneca would suggest he's like literally tearing down liberal arts education and suggesting it doesn't have value. I'm going to contend it's almost the opposite of that effect. Actually, what he's going for is more along the lines of suggesting, like you're not going to learn something that you're literally going to apply from, a course of study like that. But what you are going to access based on that is the foundation to kind of pick up other things. So it's one of those things where it's hard to kind of equate to anything. There's a Latin phrase that goes post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means this, therefore that. And it's considered a logical fallacy. The logic there kind of being, like if I were to suggest, like I wore a black shirt today and therefore I didn't get into a car accident. So I should always wear black shirts. And in reality, that's probably completely a coincidence. Even though one thing came before the other, to assume that's a causal connection is a fallacy. And so Seneca kind of laying out that this liberal arts education, saying that we need that and it directly leads to all these other good things, that's a fallacy. That's not quite right. But still, we need something of the substance of that to kind of build a foundation in ourselves so that we're ready to kind of pursue these other studies, learn these other really, really important things. Okay, that's the bulk of what I want to get at from Seneca. But again, feel free to dive in deeper there as you're so inclined. And I forgot one of my favorite quotes here. And I say favorite not because I necessarily agree with it. In fact, I actually kind of disagree with it, but because I think it's kind of ripe for discussion. This is a quote right from the very beginning of the essay. It's literally the second sentence we have. It says, "Well, I have no respect for any study whatsoever if it ends in the making of money." I'm just going to leave that one there. I'm curious if you agree with Seneca, what we think he's really saying, if that's problematic at all. Spoiler, I think it's a little problematic from a modern perspective, but coming from the context Seneca was operating in, I do sort of see what he's aiming at. But in any event, consider that part of the discussion as well. So the last part that I want to take us to here, and this is where I'm not as prepared for this video as I should have been. I forgot to open this file, so bear with me while I open a PDF for myself. This is the Davidson and Catapodis. Oh gosh, I'm actually not even in the right space. You know what, I'm going to go without actually opening the document myself, because for most of what I have, I don't think we necessarily need to actually read from the document, and I don't want to stall the video or risk my mixing up the editing of it. So I want to look first at the first paragraph of page 225. You can kind of review that for yourself. And so it discusses class ranking as an idea. And I'm curious of just like when we hear that term, when we're reminded of it, because I expect that was likely a part of many of your high school experiences, what we think of class ranking. Is it helpful? Is it beneficial? Does it lead to problems? What's sort of your perspective? What does it actually mean? And then what do we think of this idea that education should align with the ideas of, quote, uniformity, productivity, standardization, and automation? So that's a very specific kind of set of things listed there. And I'm curious if that aligns with our own kind of views of education. And then on page 226, towards the middle of the paragraph there, it suggests that grades are a false currency. And I wanted to pose a question of like, what does that even mean? And again, do we agree with what the authors have come up with there? And then finally on 227, there's the big paragraph there. And to read one quote that I had kind of pulled out from that, reads, in short, in car rides or restaurant reviews, the person receiving the evaluation typically receives more evaluative information from a wider variety of perspectives than a student might receive in a course. And so I think this is literally true, right? And so I'm curious of like the sort of what we think of that, what kind of problems that might highlight, or are those problems? Do we kind of feel like that's actually not a problematic thing? Any of that's kind of fair game in the discussion. But okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Again, all of these readings I think have plenty to say, and I've kind of scratched the surface here for the sake of efficiency in this video. But please feel free to weigh in on any given one of them, any combination of them in our discussion below. All right, thanks as always for watching, and I'll catch you next time.